Do we really believe that the United States would be in this war absent Netanyahu?
Iran actually, ironically, doesn't have nukes, but the two countries attacking it do.
They don't want Reza Pahlavi and some Democratic
failed
transition.
state. They want
a failed state. When Trump talks about we need to take out their ballistic missiles, those are threats to Israel. They're not threats to the United States.
Any Democrat who votes for the funding of this war should be primaried. Do you include the leaders of the party in that?
And you see some Democrats, including the leadership, like Chuck Schumer, who seem to fundamentally either not understand or not care.
Obama did go to war in Libya without war powers resolution. Did you object to Libya behind the scenes at the time? Ben Rhodes, co-host of Pod Save the World, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama. Thank you for joining me.
Good to see you, Mehdi.
Ben, a lot going on in the world, but obviously Iran is the dominant story. You have been quite outspoken on this issue with Tommy Vito, your co-host at Pod Save the World, which is interesting because you come from the foreign policy community in the sense that you held a senior national security role in government, although even then you were famously critical of the blob, which seems to have only gotten bigger over the past decade and a half. Talk to me about your reaction to this war. Did you see it coming? Were you surprised at the nature of it, the extent of it, the size of it?
I mean, unfortunately, I saw it coming for a long time, Mehdi, all the way back to when Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. I feel like that kind of set us on a course of some inevitability to what we're seeing now. Then the following year, you saw Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC commander, assassinated by Trump. Then you saw the so-called 12-day war last year. We've been building in this direction. So I wasn't surprised that we kind of ended up here. I think what I was genuinely surprised by, though, Mehdi, is the absolute half-assed way that Donald Trump got us into this war. No pretext of an imminent threat, no explanation of what he was doing, no effort to conceal the reality that Bibi Netanyahu essentially bullied him into this war, and no articulation of what this is all about, what we're even trying to achieve. So unfortunately, not surprised we're here, but boy, this is even worse than I imagined it. And as you know, I've been worried about this for 15 years, and here we are.
So it's interesting you mentioned, I mean, there's so much to unpack, but let's just pick on the Israel angle very quickly at the top. We just did a poll with Data for Progress, which shows half of Americans think that Trump went to war for Netanyahu, not for Americans. Marco Rubio basically said the quiet part out loud at the Capitol, saying we attacked because Israel was about to attack Iran. I was just watching a clip of Joel Rubin, who I'm sure you know was in the State Department under Obama, even worked on the Bernie campaign, I think, if I'm right, who former Jewish State Department official, who just went on CNN and responded to Megyn Kelly saying this is Israel's war, saying that is an anti-Semitic trope. He said we must stop suggesting that foreign governments or Jews are manipulating our president. What do you say to someone like Joel?
I mean, I just think it's asking us to not see what we're seeing with our own eyes, Mehdi.
Yeah.
Do we really believe that the United States would be in this war absent Netanyahu? Would the United States have just decided to do this otherwise? And look, I'll just give you a few pieces of this. Number one, Netanyahu wanted Obama to do this. Yep. This isn't new. It's not like this even just started with Trump. He has wanted to go to war with Iran for decades. He said that himself in his own words after this.
So I've been dreaming about it for 40 years, I think he said last week.
So I was there at the time, and I can tell you that he wanted to do this in the Obama years, and that wasn't exactly a secret. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is the capabilities. Because the thing that the United States, from a security perspective, is threatened by is principally the Iranian nuclear program, right? That could pose a risk to global nonproliferation. The United States has an interest in a government like Iran's not obtaining a nuclear weapon. This war is not about that. Iran wasn't anywhere near having enough nuclear fuel for a weapon. They hadn't even begun a weaponization program. So the targets, when Trump talks about we need to take out their ballistic missiles and we need to take out their military capability, well, those are threats to Israel. They're not threats to the United States. Iran doesn't have ballistic missile capability that could reach anywhere near the United States, despite what Trump was kind of beginning to say before the war about an ICBM program. That doesn't exist. And then the last piece, Mehdi, that is just staring us in the face here is that there was no groundswell of support for this in the United States or even in the Republican Party or the MAGA movement. who was for this? It's a very small number of people. It was Netanyahu and his coalition government in Israel, like Lindsey Graham and some of the kind of real dead-ender hawks in the United States, a lot of the kind of pro-Israel voices, AIPAC and others in the United States, not really anybody else.
Yeah.
And so, look, I want to be clear, and I'm not just saying this to kind of avoid the charge of anti-Semitism, which has been leveled at me for different things over the years, which is ironic because my mother's Jewish, but put that aside. Donald Trump is responsible. I actually don't think it's fair to say,
yes, I agree,
it's all Netanyahu. No, like, this is the guy who took us to war. He could have said no to Netanyahu. So I actually don't think we should absolve Trump
agreed
for the responsibility of the decision. But if you, as a matter of analysis, can acknowledge that Bibi pushed him to do this, that, as Marco Rubio said out loud, one of the reasons they did it might have been that they couldn't tell Israel no. And so if Israel struck, and I'll tell you, Mehdi, when we did war games on Iran, it was always an understanding that if Israel bombed Iran and Iran started attacking Israel, the United States would probably get drawn in. Like, that's, everybody knows that who's followed this issue. And I think Rubio said the quiet part out loud, that they could either do it with Israel or they could get drawn in, as they did in the 12-day war. And here we are.
Or they could have stopped Israel, as Joe Biden did during his presidency.
As Obama did, as Bush did.
So,
liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
It's just, yeah.
Just give us an insight, if you can. What kind of things did Netanyahu say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago when you guys are in office? And what was Barack Obama's response?
Well, the first thing is that he did not want there to be a diplomatic agreement.
The JCPOA.
The JCPOA. And you'll remember that, and he said this publicly in his speech to Congress, the only agreement that they could live with is one that eliminated all of Iran's ballistic missiles, all of Iran's nuclear capability, and all of Iran's support for proxies, which is essentially the same thing as saying there'll never be a diplomatic agreement, because anyone who knows anything about the Iranian regime knows that they would never agree to those terms. And at the same time, he was constantly indicating that inevitably we're going to have to confront the Iranians with military force. Like, inevitably we're going to have to do something, right? And so he was pretty reticent because he knew Obama didn't want to start a war with Iran, and just kind of outright saying, let's bomb Iran next week. But the subtext of everything he was doing was no diplomacy, no agreements with this regime, and we're going to have to deal with it militarily at some point. And it's better to deal with it militarily than your deal, right? And so that was always the case. Now, because Obama was quite firm in saying, I want to pursue diplomacy, we were able to kind of, forestall not just the U.S. taking military action, but Israel. And I think Biden, who, as you know, I've been immensely critical of his Gaza policy, it's pretty clear that after October 7th, Netanyahu was at least floating this as a possibility, and Biden didn't want to do that, and so Trump's the first president who couldn't say no to Netanyahu on this.
So Biden did stop Netanyahu from attacking Iran and didn't attack himself. But even before October 7th, he had campaigned on rejoining the nuclear deal that he was vice president of. He was vice president of Obama when it was signed. He didn't do that. And people I've talked to around that administration say he clearly wasn't interested. It wasn't a priority. It wasn't something he wanted to spend political capital on, either rolling back Trump sanctions on Iran or rejoining the deal. His own vice president, Kamala Harris, during the campaign, when asked what is America's number one adversary, who's the number one threat, immediately Iran. Biden-Harris didn't do a great job of taking us back to the Obama years on Iran, did they?
Absolutely not. And this was infuriating to me at the time. And look, let's talk about two of the three countries that Trump is trying to conquer the last couple months. He didn't come back into the Cuba normalization either, right? Like, he could have gotten elected,
which you led on, I remember.
Which I led on, and he campaigned on rejoining the nuclear deal. He could have just come back into the nuclear agreement right away. He could have just reopened relations with Cuba right away. And I think he didn't want to take on the political grief of getting criticized and being called weak. Bob Menendez was still the Democrat who was the leading Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a notable hawk on Iran and Cuba. Didn't want to take him on. And frankly, I think he thought that, well, these are Obama things, and he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder about Obama. And so I'm not going to spend my political capital to kind of restore Obama's accomplishments. But the reality is that was incredibly short-sighted, because throughout the Biden administration, Iran rebuilt its nuclear capabilities and expanded its nuclear program. And frankly, in Cuba, things just got worse and worse for the Cuban people. On the Cuba one, I actually don't think Trump could be doing what he is doing to the Cubans without Biden essentially going along with the Trump maximum pressure campaign. Iran, I wouldn't lay that entirely at the feet of Biden, but it is definitely a missed opportunity. And I'd say the Kamala Harris comment was crazy to me. I mean, how can you look at Russia and China and say somehow Iran, this kind of medium-sized country on the other side of the world, is the biggest threat to the United States?
Isn't that because one area that all Democrats have failed on, including Barack Obama, we'll come back to Obama, but Biden, Harris, the general Democratic foreign policy machine, liberal media, is even if they don't support bombing Iran, they supported the idea that Iran is this existential threat to Israel and to America in some ways. It's the number one state sponsor of terror. You always hear the same lines. There's never been a sense of challenging the premises that actually this is a country, it's an authoritarian dictatorship like many other in the Middle East. We do deals with all sorts of authoritarian countries. We don't have to be permanently at war with this one country. And I know the JCPOA was dealing with the nuclear issue, but there was also talk of them being able to discuss other issues that weren't on the nuclear negotiating table. Isn't the fundamental premise that they never addressed the premise head on, the leaders of the Democratic Party, that why are we in this existential state of like 40 years of, enemyship with Iran when we do deals with horrible regimes all over the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think Obama came the closest to taking that on. And, when I look back on it, Mehdi, and you and I talked a lot during the JCPOA, in addition to dealing with the nuclear issue, there was a possibility that that deal could have begun an evolution in relations between the United States and Iran, frankly, could have begun an evolution inside of Iranian politics. And actually, I think Netanyahu was afraid of that. Netanyahu was more afraid of the success of the Iran nuclear deal than the failure of it. But to your point,
we've seen that over the. Sorry, go on.
Well, no, all I was going to say is I agree with the Democratic Party that the throat clearing that has to be done. Even to those who defended the JCPOA, for instance. I used to kind of look at the statements that Democratic senators would put out when they would come out in support of the Iran nuclear deal. And there'd be like 3 paragraphs about how horrible the Iranian government was. And by the time they said, we should support this deal, you didn't know what side they were on. And I do think that played into, you're right, I think it played into this notion that we're constantly building this regime up into the kind of,
and the war becomes inevitable, right? At some point, some president is going to pull the trigger. If not George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, it's Donald Trump.
That's right. And I just think that there's a lot to that. A lot of it is Israel and AIPAC kind of constantly every year, the 8 years I was in government, I'm sure it's every other year. Every year AIPAC around its conference would have some new package of legislation to target the Iranians, in some fashion, right? That was a piece of it. Piece of it was I think America has a kind of pathology about these countries to humiliate us. Cuba, Iran, right? The 59 Cuban Revolution, the 79 Iranian Revolution, they took our hostages. And so there's this kind of, we're going to get revenge. We're going to get these people back.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. We've so far in this conversation, both of us, obviously you're a former employee, I'm a journalist, praised Barack Obama's nuclear deal. Clearly that nuclear deal was a good thing. I was very critical of many things Barack Obama did on the international stage. You know that. I interviewed you, I think in 2015 in the White House, where we talked about many of these issues. But clearly in his last couple of years, in his second term, he did a lot of good from Paris to Cuba to Iran, and that was then torn up by Donald Trump. But there's one thing he did which is being invoked constantly right now. I'm not sure if you saw Bill Maher interview Adam Schiff on Friday, where he read out a statement from the administration to Schiff. He said the president has the constitutional authority to direct the use of military force because he could reasonably determine that such use of force was in the national interest. Schiff said that's a very vague statement. Bill Maher says, well, that was Barack Obama speaking about Libya. And that clip's gone viral because a lot of Republicans are fairly, I would argue, pointing out Obama did go to war in Libya. Without war powers resolution, without a declaration of war from Congress, without an authorization for the use of military force. And Libya is a failed state today. They did do regime change. It wasn't supposed to be regime change. It was supposed to be protecting Benghazi, but it became regime change. As Hillary laughed later, we saw he died. What's your response as someone who's intimately involved in that period of national security and foreign policy? That's a fair point, isn't it?
It's a fair point. Now, I'll say two things about this, Mehdi. That are not to defend Libya, because I acknowledge the mistakes made in Libya. I've included Libya in the litany of reasons why we shouldn't be in Iran. I learned from that just like we had to learn from Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm not here to defend everything Obama did. I think there are two important pieces of context here that get left out of the Bill Maher kind of gotcha on this.
Yeah.
One is that legally, if we're talking about legal bases, there was a UN Security Council resolution that authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians in Libya, like the specific language under international law that is used to sanction the use of military force.
Although you guys went beyond that, right, when it became regime change?
We did. And so again, I'm not here to defend every piece of it, but there was a legal basis under international law for the Libya operation. There's absolutely no legal basis whatsoever for this war in Iran. Again, that doesn't make the Libya operation right. And it doesn't mean that there wasn't a lack of domestic legal authorization for the Libya war, which leads me to the second point, which is, as you know, one of the things that Barack Obama was most criticized for in his foreign policy is that after the Syrian chemical weapons attack, he was going to bomb Syria, and he stopped and he said, I won't do this without congressional authorization. He went to Congress. Congress would not authorize military force, so he didn't use it. And even people like Marco Rubio, who'd been calling to bomb Syria, flipped and said, I'm not going to vote for this. Yeah. Which, again, we can argue about whether we should have bombed Syria, but actually Obama in that one said, I am going to submit, in part because of Libya. I was there.
Rubio is so shameless. He's on both sides because he supported the intervention in Libya, but he also said the Obama administration should come to Congress, which of course they haven't done this time around.
Well, and that's the thing that Syria piece is important because that was Obama saying, I actually agree. And he said that I was in the room with him in the Oval Office when he kind of shocked us and said, I'm going to go to Congress on this. People had been showing this clip of Obama from the campaign where he said, we should never go to war without a congressional authorization. And he looked at me and he said, I agree with that guy. And I learned from Libya. He was not comfortable with Libya for that reason. And so, again, it doesn't absolve him of not.
Did you object to Libya behind the scenes at the time? I know that Hillary and others were very pro.
I did not. I thought it was a humanitarian. I mean, again, I'm not here to defend that. I'm willing to say I was wrong, which I think more people in the U.S. national security should say about things. So again, we could get into why.
I mean, the generation before you didn't learn lessons from Iraq, and the current generation you're saying is not learning from Libya, and you're trying to say that Libya is actually something we should invoke for Iran. It's not just Libya, though. Just in terms of kind of the Democratic Party, and I want to come to some of the Democrats as well. But very quickly, there's another area that you and I discussed in 2015 on Al Jazeera, which was drone strikes. And again, you hear Republicans today talking about Donald Trump's authority to kill people abroad, including, for example, in the Caribbean. We've seen hundreds of people, many innocent people, fishermen, people who are accused of being narco-terrorists, blown out of the water by Peter Hegseth and Donald Trump in the Caribbean. A lot of Republicans, again, fairly point out that Barack Obama took people out with drones. He killed American citizens with drones. He killed people who were not terrorists in what were called signature strikes. Hundreds of civilians, according to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, were killed in the middle of that war on terror with drones. Again, do you accept now in hindsight that did give a loaded gun to a Trump?
Yes and no. I mean, because again, the difference here I would draw is that, look, drones are a weapon, right? Just like any other weapon. And so to me, the question is it right and legal to be using this weapon against a certain target? And I accept that Obama, in the Obama era, there was far too much use of drones. But the reality is the targets of drone strikes in the Obama era were under the authorization for the use of military force against Al-Qaeda and associated forces, right? And so you can say we should not have taken those strikes, but you can't say that there was no legal basis for the United States to kind of be taking strikes at Al-Qaeda or associated targets. The fishermen in the Caribbean or the drug traffickers in the Caribbean, whatever they are, and I still think we don't know, there was no legal basis whatsoever. No, Trump wasn't saying that they were.
Yeah, he's just an executive order he's put out.
Yeah, and so legally, I mean, there's also a moral and ethical and strategic question about drones, but on this question of legality, The use of drones against al-Qaeda targets was under an authorization for the use of military force passed by the United States Congress. Trump just deciding to start blowing up boats in the Caribbean, I think, is a qualitatively different thing because it had no legal basis whatsoever. There was no case made to the American people about why that was a threat, right? So the use of drones writ large, I think, is, as we're seeing now, it's the future of warfare. But I think we have to think of it as a weapon like any other weapon. And so the question is, should you be using the weapon, not is a drone itself in some different category? Because the reality is everybody's using drones.
I think Obama's drone record, as you know, will haunt him. Although a lot of people don't realize that Donald Trump did more drone strikes in his first term than Obama did over 2 terms.
He did.
Let me just ask you one.
You know why? Because this is important. Again, not here to defend every aspect of this, but we did have standards on targeting around civilian casualties
Trump
complained about
Yeah.
and got rid of. And when Hexas says we've loosened the rules of engagement, we're not going to tie our hands. Like, that's how you get schools blown up, like we're seeing in Iran.
Although a lot of civilians were killed on Obama's watch, we're not here to relitigate that, but I just want to make that clear. Let me ask you this about the Democratic Party. One last question on the Democrats. You just said on Pod Save the World this week, I think I just saw a clip saying that any Democrat who votes for the funding of this war should be primaried. Do you include the leaders of the party in that, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who have been piss poor in terms of opposing this war so far?
100%. And the reason I said that is because I just don't think people should get a pass whatsoever on this question. And because to me, it's a moral question. It's a right versus wrong question. And it's a credibility question, right? Democrats often want to carve out on these issues, right? Either because of AIPAC or because they don't want to look weak or whatever the thing is. If you can't say that I'm uniformly against an illegal and stupid war launched by an authoritarian president who seems to be getting more comfortable launching illegal and stupid wars, if you can't stand up on that issue, first of all, that's wrong. But second of all, how can I trust you on anything? So to me, I don't care who the Democrat is. If you can just kind of unequivocally come out and say, I'm against this war, I'm not going to fund this war, then I don't know why you're in politics in the Democratic Party.
It's a good question. Have you been surprised, as someone who was in the Obama administration for 2 terms doing foreign policy in DC, the change in the Democratic Party, especially at the level of the base, at the voter level, but also in Congress, on issues like foreign wars and Israel?
I've tried to be a part of that change. I'm not giving myself too much credit, but I see a lot of what I've been trying to do since I left government is reckoning, like we been doing today, like with our own mistakes, reckoning with things I knew at the time. In the administration, I didn't like everything we did. I certainly didn't like the breadth of the use of drones, just to take one example. But I've wanted to try to extend the window of what people are for in the Democratic Party when it comes to foreign policy, and I guess it's a good question. I'm not surprised because even in the Obama years, I felt there was this cavernous disconnect between the people that were in Congress and the people who worked on national security and the public. Because I worked on an anti-war campaign in 2008. Barack Obama never would have gotten elected president if he hadn't opposed the war in Iraq and Hillary Clinton had supported it. In 2012, Mitt Romney ran as this hawk to our right. We won the debate on foreign policy because we were trying not to get into wars, right? And so I'd seen that public opinion, especially in the Democratic base, was always in a different place than political and national security elites. I think what happened is then Trump comes in, and Trump is tapping into that. And Trump is taking the Republican brand and aligning it with anti-war politics, which is a bit rich given the fact that the Republicans started the war on terror and the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. But he made some inroads there. And then in the Biden years, I actually think Gaza was at the turning point, because you have all these people who have had these views for a long time. Like, why are we supporting Israel and its policies? Why are we getting in all these wars? But they were kind of pushed down inside the party, inside the caucus itself, too, like the Ilhan Omars of the world or whomever you want to name. And then Gaza happens, and it kind of confirms all the worst views that people had about Democratic politicians and what they're willing to go along with, about the immorality of this kind of foreign policy, about the absurdity of it. And so I think Gaza is kind of what finally forced an alignment with public opinion. And you see some Democrats who get that,
Yes.
like a Chris Van Hollen or something. And you see some Democrats, including the leadership, like Chuck Schumer, who seem to fundamentally either not understand or not care that his own voters, 80, 90% of the Democratic Party, doesn't want to go along with this anymore. Majorities of Democrats believe there was a genocide in Gaza. Majorities of Jewish Democrats believe there were war crimes committed in Gaza. I've taken the position that Israel should not get any military assistance from the United States, given what it did in Gaza. That's still an extreme position if you were to poll members of Congress. It's not at all if you were to poll Democratic voters.
Or the American public, to be honest.
Yes. So this is a case of a party just kind of needing to get where its own voters are.
Before we run out of time, let's just return to Iran. You were in the room when decisions were made on war and peace, drone strikes, invasions. What's happening right now in the Trump White House? I know it's very hard. These people are strange people, to put it politely. But we're seeing reporting that Peter Hegseth and Marco Rubio are trying to offer Donald Trump an off-ramp. You saw Rubio make a statement saying, our goals are to destroy the Navy, destroy the missiles. We're meeting those goals. Staying away from regime change, staying away from supporting the people of Iran, staying away from destroying the nuclear program. What do you think internally they're now resetting the goals are? And where does this war go next on the basis of that?
I think that Trump was misled by Netanyahu and others into thinking that this would go very well or be somehow quick. I think Venezuela got in his head.
Yes, agreed.
I can do this fast. And so I think what they're doing is they're realizing that all of those ideas are out the window here. And that we need to therefore figure out a way to make, we had a 12-day war last year. This needs to be a 21-day war or something. And they're trying to find that off-ramp because they're getting pressure from their own political party and from their own MAGA movement. They're seeing the public opinion polls. But what is so frustrating to me, Mehdi, is that every single one of us, you included, who was against this war, predicted all these consequences.
Yes.
It's not a mystery that the Iranian regime would dug in. It's not a mystery.
Or attack the Gulf. Trump said, I didn't realize they would attack the Gulf. What?
Anybody's looked at this.
Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan said this week, I was surprised they attacked the Gulf. What? What were they going to do?
They've been saying that they would do this. They fired warning shots in the 12-day war at the Doha base to kind of send a message, hey, this is what we can do, right? Of course they're attacking the Gulf. Of course they're burning it all down. Of course the IRGC is the strongest force in Iran. They're the people with the guns, right? And so Trump, I think, is going to look for some out. The problem with that, Mehdi, is Israel gets a vote and the Iranians get a vote. I don't think Israel wants to stop this anytime soon because Israel wants violence and chaos in Iran. They want Iran. They don't want Reza Pahlavi and some Democratic
failed state. They want to live.
They want a failed state. They want it for a strategy of Israeli hegemony in the region and freedom of action to annex the West Bank and take parts of southern Lebanon, parts of southern Syria. Chaos suits that strategy. So why would Israel stop their own bombing of Iran? The Iranians get a vote too, though. They want to make clear that the cost of attacking them is very high so they don't get attacked again. So why would they stop firing drones at our bases in the Gulf? Why would they not massacre their own people if they rise up like Trump said? So I think the problem in the White House is you have a very small number of people. They've cut the NSC size down to a few dozen people, Mehdi, who basically don't do anything because Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff do everything, and Marco Rubio. But you have this small group of people who are like, we've got a big problem here. Let's just try to hit the stop button. But the problem is when you start wars, you can't decide when they end and on what terms they end. I would argue that the 12-day war was not a distinct war from this one. We're in one war with Iran. And so even if they stop bombing, that war is not over. Iran could keep doing things. Israel could keep doing things. Iran could implode.
Although it's interesting when you say it's one war, because of course the hawks often say, this is one war. This never ended. Iran has been attacking us for years from Iraq to, and then the Iranians would say, yeah, it is one war, but we're going to go beyond 79. We're going to go back to 1953 when you depose. So it's interesting where you want to start the clock in terms of this bad blood between the United States and Iran. Last question for you, Ben. How worried are you about escalation? People are talking about, it sounds crazy, but with Donald Trump, nothing's crazy. This idea that we could end up with some kind of nuclear escalation. Obviously, Iran actually, ironically, doesn't have nukes, but the two countries attacking it do.
I've been asked about that, and I don't think it's likely at all. I certainly don't think it's likely that the United States would drop a nuclear weapon on Iran. However, Israel also has nuclear weapons, and if things are going very badly, it's not impossible, but I certainly don't think it's likely. I worry more about regional conflagration, an Iranian civil war collapse. It draws in Pakistan because of the Bullied region, and Turkey because of the Kurdish region, and Lebanon is being carved up, and the region is just a war zone, and it's chaos. And actually, you don't need a nuclear. I actually don't think. I don't know what someone would drop a nuclear bomb to destroy at this point, because again, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. So
why have a nuclear Armageddon when we already have an economic and financial Armageddon?
Exactly.
Ben Rhodes from Pod Save the World, thank you so much for taking time out, and thank you for taking my questions.
Thanks, Mehdi.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.